You're watching a follow-up Friday episode for the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast, episode 59 with David Fitch. I'm Josh Havens.
And I'm Chris Lamberth.
This was just a really good conversation. David Fitch is he's a down-to-earth guy.
Yeah.
Who's been through a lot in terms of spiritual maturity. He's got some good miles on him.
Yeah.
And that comes through both in the way he talks, the way he writes, and the way that he has conversations on Facebook, which, by the way, you guys should go check him out on Facebook. He literally opens up conversations for you to have with him on Facebook.
Yeah, they're legitimate conversations, which is really rare today to find
So
that kind
rare.
of a thing to happen. And, it shouldn't surprise me, but I'm still very surprised when we talk to people like this, and they are as down to earth as David was. Because, again, I just sort of, he has all of this experience, and he's an academic, and he's written, and he's pastored, and so there's still even this stigma, even in my mind, that these kinds of people are just going to be a little bit more stiff, maybe a little bit more difficult to talk to. Or when we initiated the call and we started talking to him, he's just so much fun to talk to.
Oh, we had probably a good 20-minute conversation before we even pushed the record button.
That's right.
Just talking about who we are, where we go to church, and our experiences, and it's good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just... Again, I think maybe that should be our first takeaway, is to sort of recognize, that even these people who have this vast array of experience in the pastoral and academic world, man, this lifestyle of discipleship should ground us in our life in a way that actually makes us more approachable and more fun and more joy to be with and to hang out with. We should want to hang out with them more. That's what I'm trying to say here. Than otherwise. And yet we kind of have this thing reversed in our minds.
Which is the very point of the book, The Church of Us versus Them. His personality is so disarming that it invites you into what he calls the space beyond enemies.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really rare thing in Christians in the church today. We have to learn from that because of all the junk that's going on in 2020. The church being united should not be one of the problems. This should be the time for us to find unity, and not whether or not we're fighting for racial justice or wearing masks or loving our neighbor or whatever the thing is.
Yep.
And if we have an approach to people, a very down-to-earth faith that's authentic and real, it disarms the people who are trying to fight us. Mm-hmm. Not in a way that we're winning the fight over them, but it's moving beyond the fight into a place where the fight's not the fight anymore.
Yeah.
Which is... I don't know, it feels weird to say that because so many times we get caught up in this idea that, we have to win the fight. The fight is the thing.
I think this is really illustrated by how David even shared our podcast episode on his Facebook page.
Yeah.
Because, so we titled it, "Can the Church Move Beyond Enemy Making?" And so he shared that, and he asked that question in the post. But in parentheses, he also added, "Or should we?" Which is extremely provocative as far as like, oh, wait a second, that's a good question. And yet, I think it genuinely invites this sort of engagement, that this really isn't about making enemies in the long run. It's about moving beyond that, making enemies. And so we're going to come at each issue from very different perspectives. We each have our own presuppositions. We each have our own different experiences and worldview through which we view the world. And that's necessarily going to change the way we approach each issue. One of the things, though, that I like about the book and our conversation that we had, just who we are as disciples should at least provide enough of a uniting perspective that we are not bound by the different positions that we create and we find ourselves on necessarily. We're going to disagree again. But how do we move beyond that instead of just like waving the banner, as David talks about, that says, nope, you're not part of us, stay out, you're other, and instead can say, no, come on, let's go. Let's figure this out. Let's wrestle with this together. And I think that just makes a completely different it causes us to look at it from a completely different perspective. And in that perspective, by the way, is very hard to get a hold of when you're not used to thinking about that. And I don't know anybody who is used to thinking about things like that. And so this has been a very difficult thing for me to think about over the last few weeks and try to integrate into my life, even after reading this book and having this conversation. This isn't an easy thing to do, to have conversations like Jesus did that truthfully disarm your opponents and instead ask deeper questions or get at the heart of things that you're not really thinking about yet.
Well, for me, this goes back to our analogy of playing a different game on the same field.
Yeah.
We're so used to, in the church, thinking about the game in terms of the way the world plays the game, which is where the divisions and the unity, or this unity, come from. That's what James says. What causes fights and quarrels among you? It's the passions within you.
Yeah.
It's the things that it's the way that you're playing the game right now. And David's calling us to stop playing that game, pay attention to the way the kingdom of God is breaking into our world, and play that game.
Yep.
And when we do that, when we find we're doing the things that Jesus did, we're doing things that are very disarming to our opponents. It causes them to stop and say, why are you even playing? What are you even doing?
Yes.
What you're doing doesn't make sense. It's not even, that's not how we play the game. You're dumb.
Yeah, I know, right? And again, this has best been illustrated to me over the past couple weeks as I'm scrolling through Facebook and I'm getting baited into conversations that I probably well, luckily I do resist. I say, no, I gotta stand out of this. But David's words have been ringing true in my mind when it comes to this engagement, because to me, if I see somebody, it doesn't matter what you're arguing for, honestly, if you're arguing for masks or how to best fight against racial injustice or, those are the two big 2020 issues that we're facing right now.
For the moment.
For the moment, exactly. Godzilla's next month. We'll worry about him later. Or what was it? Mad Max or something like that. That's next year. Right now, and so, but I'm tempted anytime I see somebody using terrible logic to argue for their position, and honestly, I don't care if it's pro-mask, anti-mask, or whatever. I really, really want to engage with them and just kind of, and it's not to troll, but I think it's playing into that wrong way of playing the old football game. And I just want to take the other side and start arguing for it.
You see an opportunity for a nice tackle.
That's right.
Want to take the thing.
I got to take it. That's right. Somebody's got the ball. They're about to score, and I think they need to be taken down a notch. And yet, when you look at Jesus, that's never the way that Jesus engages. He never went out of his way to, attack or accuse the Pharisees of doing anything, right? Now, the Pharisees, the way he lived his life, invited a certain level of scrutiny on them. And so they took the opportunity. They're like, wait. Jesus is getting ready to score that touchdown that we're talking about here. We got to take him down a notch. It's like, hey, Jesus, who should you pay your taxes to? To Caesar or to God? Where does your ultimate allegiance lie, in other words? And yet Jesus just kind of says, nah, I'm not going to play by that game.
He just runs out of bounds, and they're like, what are you doing?
That's right. He completely disarms that entire situation, and he puts forth a position that they didn't see coming and that is unwinnable for them.
Yeah.
And so that is an extremely difficult way of thinking. And you know what? This is just side benefit. It makes me think about the point that Dallas Willard makes, I think in Spirit of the Disciplines, where he talks about Jesus being the best at all these different things. And one of the things that, if we believe that Jesus was the best example that we should follow, then we should believe that he was the best logician. He was the best thinker that the world has ever seen. And I think it's really illustrated in this kind of a way of thinking that he's able to, well, number one, Jesus, again, as the embodiment of the kingdom of God, understands this way of thinking better than we do. But number two, he can just think so much better and get at this thing than we can right now. And so I think that is both a call to me. I find this to be a call to deeper study and deeper thinking so that I can train myself and, to engage in this level.
And if we want to look at it from the perspective that Dr. Snavely brings to it, and which David got at it a little bit, Jesus did those things by relying on the Spirit, and we have that same power.
That's right.
And
That's
so
true.
He may have been the greatest, but he still relied on the Spirit and calls us to do the same.
Yes.
Boy, I tell you what, on this whole issue of unity and trying to find our way past the fights, Alan Fadling, Jim and Alan Fadling, we've had him on the podcast, and then we talked to Alan again about his book, An Unhurried Life. He's got a book coming out here next month called The Way of Presence. And in it, he quotes Eugene Peterson, who says, "The Jesus way, wedded to the Jesus truth, brings about the Jesus life. We can't proclaim the Jesus truth, but then do it any old way we like, nor can we follow the Jesus way without speaking the Jesus truth. We can't suppress the Jesus way in order to sell the Jesus truth. The Jesus way and the Jesus truth must be congruent. Only when the Jesus way, is organically joined with the Jesus truth do we get the Jesus life." And I think that illustrates we're playing by a different set of rules. We're playing a different game on the same field. And we have an option. We can either shove the truth of this game that we're playing down other people's throats, which is going to cause some problems. It's going to cause division and anger and hostility. And sometimes we like to say that that's a good thing because, we're being persecuted for the sake of the gospel. Well, I think if you did it with offense in mind, that you're not being persecuted for the sake of the gospel. You're being persecuted for being an offensive jerk.
That's right. Exactly.
But when we talk about this truth that we have, in other words, the kingdom of God, the way the kingdom operates being the best thing that humanity could ever hope for, we have to do that in the way that Jesus did. We have to demonstrate that in the way that Jesus did. And it was, like you're talking about, very disarming. He doesn't jump into the fight that other people are trying to bait him into jumping into. He's being consistent with the way that the kingdom of God's rules are meant to guide life. And so he takes the truth of the kingdom of God, marries it with the way that actually operates in the world, and we get the Jesus life. And that, I think, is, at least from what I'm taking away from what David's saying, the space beyond enemies. It's where we see what Paul says when in Romans 5, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Yeah.
It's pull Paul again, 1 Corinthians, the foolishness to the Greeks that just doesn't make sense to us. But somehow God's doing this thing that is both incredibly mysterious and yet incredibly beautiful and amazing all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, number one, go out and get a copy of David's book. This book is going to change the way you think about things. Again, I texted Josh when I was only 2 or 3 chapters into reading it, and I said, this book diagnoses the problem that we have in the church right now perfectly. Now, again, after having talked with David and reflected on it, I'm not going to sit here and act like I've figured this thing out, but I do recognize the importance of thinking about the people around us in this beyond enemies making way. Even those people who are not yet Christians or disciples. Again, the temptation for us is to say, oh, well, they're out of the circle. And, when Paul can say that God comes and dies for us while we were yet enemies, it shows his own love for us, that he is not separating an us versus a them mindset, that he seeks us even in our lostness. And so that becomes that pattern that Jesus displayed for us to do. So go check this out. Go listen to the podcast if you haven't. Man, David is going to bless you. He's a ton of fun to listen to. And Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hit like and subscribe. Also, click the bell icon to turn on notifications, and we will let you know each time a video goes live. So anyway, guys, keep growing daily. We are all in this together. Glad you're going on the journey with us.